All right, take three, and welcome to Critical Wade Theory. And today we're going to be looking at another news story. So I hate the news sometimes. You get wars, you know, you can already hear the sounds of explosions in the distance, news panels angrily overlapping as some of them defend the indefensible. And I try to be calm and deliberate in how I approach these stories, but everybody's going to be a critic of something. So, despite my best efforts to be perfect or whatever, or at least good at this, there's always going to be some people who are going to say, oh, you didn't say this well enough, or you're totally wrong about that. And that's just the way things are. But let's look at an interesting story here from a little while ago. On June 13th, 2025, Israel struck more than 100 sites across Iran, nuclear facilities, missile bases, command centers. The operation had a name that sounded almost mythic: Rising Lion. Within hours, air raid sirens wailed over Tel Aviv and Jerusalem as Iran fired back. Israel called it its darkest day. But for one man, it might have been a turning point, even salvation. Benjamin Netanyahu, once cornered, legally embattled, politically isolated, suddenly stood tall again. The war that put millions of lives in danger also revived his grip on power. So today we're asking, was this just a military strike, or was it something more? A political reset cloaked in the language of survival? So, as I said, my name's Wade, and this is Critical Wade Theory, or CWT, and we're looking at the comeback kid, in a manner of speaking. His coalition was in crisis, he had corruption trials looming or even underway. And just a day before the missiles flew, Netanyahu was indeed on the brink. Two ultra Orthodox parties threatened to leave his coalition over military conscription for their followers. He barely survived a confidence vote that could have ended his government. Then came the airstrikes. Yes, saved by the fighter jets flying overhead and threatening doom to the people down below. Operation Rising Lion, named after the old Iranian lion and sun emblem, wasn't just another show of force. It was a full scale offensive, coordinated between Israeli Air Force units and covert Mossad operations deep inside Iran. A coalition insider told CNN, quote, "The cards are in his hands. If they weren't a week ago, they are now." And that's exactly what happened. The moment the war began, all domestic tensions, the protests, legal proceedings, coalition feuds, all of it seemed to just vanish. It was an interesting development, and I'll explain how the dynamics actually tend to work in these situations like this. So, for 2 years, Israel had been convulsed by protest. First over Netanyahu's judicial overhaul, then over the Gaza war, or you might just call it a genocide of Palestinians, and then the hostages were at the time still held in Gaza, which was also controversial. Hundreds of thousands filled the streets, reservists were refusing duty, demonstrators blocked highways. But after June 13th, it all seemingly stopped. The military really kind of saved him. Israel's home front command banned large gatherings, citing security risks. Protest zones became no protest zones. And in the courts, Netanyahu's corruption trial was postponed conveniently. Temporarily, judges said, but the message was clear: national unity first, accountability later. War had done what politics couldn't: it silenced dissent. So, war is not only statecraft, but also a matter of convenience in a lot of cases for those who are waging it. So, what a lot of us view as darkness some people view as, the light at the end of the tunnel. So political scientists have a term for this: rally round the flag, sometimes called the rally round the flag effect. So when external threats rise, internal divisions collapse, at least for a while. And it's a rather convenient thing for those in power, and from a sort of anarchic or state critical perspective, something deeper is happening. When regimes face crisis, that's collapsing legitimacy, internal rebellion, mass protest, etc., they often reach for war, not to defend the nation, but to discipline the nation. One might have described this as repression through externalization, turning outward to restore control inward. Netanyahu changed the world to stop it from changing him. So, yes, the triumphant tone of the warmonger, became a very prevalent aspect of this time. And, he would say things like, "This is not just our right to defend ourselves, it's our destiny," or whatever. Just talk like that. Destiny, perhaps, but also design. Inside the prime minister's circle, aides told CNN that, quote, "If we are doing something good for Israel, it's good to us electorally," end quote. So that's not just collateral benefit, it's not really just coincidence, it's a strategy. The corruption trial fades, the protests might just vanish, the opposition rallies behind him in the name of unity, and the hostages who were still held in Gaza at the time disappear from the headlines. And, it's part of the long game of power. You always want to have an official enemy to unify against and to distract the critics from getting too loud and too prominent and successful. You don't want to have your party to be challenged. And to understand how we got here, you have to sort of rewind. Back in 2023, Netanyahu's government moved to gut the judiciary, the so called reasonableness doctrine, which allowed courts to strike down arbitrary government actions or actions that were deemed arbitrary. That was targeted first, you know, and critics called it a constitutional coup. Protesters called it an authoritarian drift. So basically, it's like the equivalent over there of having checks and, our type of system of checks and balances. It's like their version of it, having the courts being able to challenge the power of the rest of the government. But behind the legal jargon, something larger stirred: the question of what kind of state Israel wanted to be. Jewish, that is, an ethno state; democratic, both or neither. So groups like the Anti-Occupation Bloc linked the fight over judges to the system of control in the occupied territories. The same logic, they argued, that governs Palestinians without rights was being applied inside Israel itself. And that's what made the domestic unrest so dangerous for Netanyahu. It connected the personal, the political, and yes, even the colonial. War then became the clean break. The narrative shifted from who controls the courts to who defends the nation. And the aftermath worked out pretty much the way Netanyahu wanted it to. Iran's response was swift, sure, missiles rained down, and the regime braced for escalation, and the region was obviously also bracing for escalation. But analysts warn the gamble cuts both ways. Sometimes external war tightens domestic control, sometimes it cracks it open. And for all his short term victory, Netanyahu still faces these same structural fissures: inequality, settler violence, deepening militarization, a population divided between faith and state. And of course, the old question of should we have ethno states in the first place? So, my answer to that is that no, ethno states are a bad idea. Theocracies are also a bad idea. And if you combine the two, well, then it becomes potentially even more dangerous as a concept. And the fissures I'm talking about, they don't just disappear under the roar of jets, they actually ultimately deepen. So the stability that Netanyahu had, it it is short lived. Things change, and Benjamin Netanyahu may have found his Churchill moment, as some people were referring to it as, and it might have sort of reinvigorated his ego. But history is full of leaders who mistook momentary triumph for permanence. In the end, Operation Rising Lion might not be remembered as the day Israel secured its future, but as the day it surrendered its descent. And we'll see how long that can last. The power of the right wing forces in Israel and, of course, elsewhere in the world. How much longer can they silence dissenters? How much longer can they control the narrative? And eventually, I guess we'll see a few of these countries will swing more in the other direction. What one would assume, anyway. Anyway, this episode was produced by me with research from CNN, Reuters, NPR, and the New Arab, and also the Guardian too. I should mention I also looked at the Guardian. So thanks for listening, and yeah, I hope I put this into perspective and gave you an understanding of how the rally around the flag effect works, and how it's a very intentional thing a lot of the time. You have to figure if it wasn't intentional, it wouldn't be done so often. Anyway, that's it for the episode, and have a good day to the extent possible.